When you return to the Unova region and step once more into the world of Pokémon Black and White, there is an atmosphere unlike any other generation. Something about these games feels reflective, quiet, and deeply intentional, as if every town and character was created to make you slow down and think. It's fitting, because Black and White were designed from the ground up to feel like a thematic departure, a soft philosophical reset for a franchise that had already grown enormously by the time Generation 5 arrived. Game Freak created these titles as a meditation on identity, change, and the bonds that evolve with us. And as you drift deeper into the world, the slow, immersive lore begins uncovering itself piece by piece, revealing one of the most thoughtful regions the series has ever seen. Unova was the first region intentionally modeled after a real-world location outside Japan, New York City, and its surrounding states. This global approach gave the games a far broader cultural foundation. The region feels bigger, more urban, more alive. Skyscrapers pierce the sky, industrial bridges stretch across rivers, and bustling streets echo with conversation. Yet between these towering structures are pockets of quiet nature, places that feel almost forgotten. Each area represents a kind of tension, the old and the new, tradition and innovation, humanity and Pokémon trying to coexist in an increasingly complicated world. It's this contrast that fuels the heart of the story. When Black and White were first conceptualized, Game Freak made a surprising design choice. They decided not to include any older Pokémon until the post-game. This wasn't done out of exclusion, but to evoke the feeling of discovering Pokémon again for the first time. By limiting the player to brand new creatures during the main story, they recreated the wonder of stepping into a world where everything feels unfamiliar. Suddenly, every encounter becomes a mystery. Every evolution is a surprise. Every battle sparks curiosity. This sense of rediscovery is part of what gives Unova its distinct identity. It's the one region where the player must truly begin fresh. The theme of truth versus ideals serves as the emotional backbone of the story. Unlike previous games, which tended to emphasize tradition, friendship, or destiny, Black and White explore philosophical conflict. It's a gentle exploration, but a deeply meaningful one. N, the enigmatic young leader of Team Plasma, doesn't simply want power, he wants freedom for Pokémon, believing that humans unintentionally harm them through companionship. Meanwhile, Getsis manipulates that ideology to seek total control. Their opposing motivations create one of the most mature narratives in Pokémon history, prompting players to think about their own relationship with the creatures they raise. Are Pokémon partners? Tools? Friends? Equals? The game doesn't force an answer, it encourages you to shape one for yourself. N himself is a mystery woven into the fabric of the region. From the moment he stands on the Ferris wheel in Nimbasa City, speaking about his doubts and hopes with quiet vulnerability, the player senses there is something unusual about him. Raised in isolation, taught only what Getsis wanted him to believe, N sees the world through a childlike lens, curious, empathetic, and conflicted. His ability to understand Pokémon speech gives him a perspective no other major character in the franchise possesses. He hears their thoughts, their fears, their desires. To him, Pokémon aren't just allies, they are voices in a world that often fails to listen. The dual dragons of Unova Reshiram and Zekrom represent the two halves of the game's central philosophy. Reshiram embodies truth, reminding the world that honesty can be painful but necessary. Zekrom symbolizes ideals, the dreams that push humanity toward change, improvement, and hope. In a rare twist, the protagonist and N each choose a different dragon depending on the version played. It's one of the only times in the series where the player is positioned as a philosophical counterbalance to the rival. You aren't simply stopping N, you're engaging in a debate that plays out symbolically through the dragons you call forth. Even the soundtrack of Black and White contributes to this contemplative mood. These games introduced more dynamic, layered music systems than previous generations. In Castelia City, you can hear the echo of footsteps and traffic beneath the melody, immersing you in the urban sprawl. In Driftvale, bluesy guitar riffs mirror the industrial nature of the port. N's theme incorporates delicate piano, emphasizing his reflective loneliness. The music breathes, shifting with your location, changing with battles, and capturing the emotional essence of each moment. Many consider it the most atmospheric soundtrack in the series because it feels almost alive. One of the most haunting pieces of lore is hidden not in a major city or legendary story, but in a quiet corner of Nakreen City's museum. The large dragon skeleton on display, known as the Dragonite fossil, has been the subject of debate for years. Some fans believe it's actually an ancient dragon that predates both Dragonite and the Tau dragons themselves, an ancient species lost to time. Others argue it may be a fragment of Kurum's shattered form, hinting at a prehistoric conflict long before the separation of Reshiram and Zekrom. The games intentionally provide no clear answer, letting the mystery sleep in the museum's polished glass. The ruins of the desert resort and relic castle also carry echoes of Unova's ancient past. Buried in sand and forgotten by time, the castle represents a civilization that once worshipped power and luxury. Clay, Driftvale's gym leader, explains that the shifting sands reveal and consume the ruins cyclically, a metaphor for history's refusal to stay buried. At the center of this labyrinth sleeps Volcarona, a Pokémon revered as the son of ancient Unova, a benevolent force worshipped for bringing warmth to freezing lands. Volcarona's presence adds another layer of depth to Unova's world building, hinting at a time when the region's climate and culture were dramatically different. Even little details like the perfectly synchronized dancers on Castelia Street, the tranquil garden hidden behind the gym in Striaton, or the windmills spinning beside the quiet towns, all contribute to a sense of place. Unova feels lived in, as if every stone and every forest carries a secret. That's why players often describe Black and White not as games they played, but as worlds they visited. They hold a special kind of nostalgia, one built not on familiar characters, but on emotional depth. The Entralink, a mysterious circular grove located in the center of Unova, adds a dreamlike layer to the region's geography. This strange realm, reached through wireless communication in the original games, blurs the boundary between reality and connection. It symbolizes the meeting of minds not just between players, but between worlds. The concept of forming bonds through invisible pathways mirrors the central theme of the region, that relationships shape everything, even when unseen. As the player moves deeper into the journey, a sense of narrative crescendo forms quietly. It's not just gym leaders waiting ahead, it's philosophies, histories, and the culmination of the region's emotional core. When the Pokémon League is interrupted by N's castle erupting from the mountainside, it feels monumental, not because of spectacle, but because the entire world's belief systems collide in that moment. The Elite Four themselves fade into insignificance as the true heart of Unova rises into view. And yet, even with all that intensity, the games remain some of the most relaxing in the series. Towns like Accumula and Nuvema offer warm simplicity. Routes feel spacious and meditative. Nighttime brings soft piano melodies that lull the player into comfort. It's this balance, the deep lore combined with gentle pacing, that makes Black and White ideal for a sleep story atmosphere. Each scene contains layers to reflect on, soft details to admire, and familiar emotions to settle into. These games were designed to grow with the player. Their themes of truth, ideals, identity, and connection become more meaningful the older you get, turning Unova into a region that evolves with time. It's one of the few Pokemon generations where revisiting it years later makes the story feel richer, not smaller. And as the lore continues to unfold through quiet moments, hidden ruins, mysterious characters, and philosophical dragons, the world of Pokemon Black and White remains a place where you can drift gently into thought and fall asleep wrapped in the soft glow of Unova's night sky. The world of Pokemon Black and White feels unlike any region that came before it, shaped by a philosophy that blends modernity with tradition in a way that makes Unova feel both familiar and distant at the same time. As you travel through its cities, forests, and bridges, you begin to realize that everything in Unova was built around contrast, old beliefs standing beside new innovations, ancient legends unfolding in the shadow of technology, and quiet natural landscapes intertwined with massive urban development. This balance between old and new defines not only the geography of the games, but the entire experience of exploring them, turning each location into a reflection of the region's deeper lore. One of the most subtly fascinating aspects of Black and White is how intentionally the region mirrors the themes of duality and truth versus ideals. Wherever you go, the environment responds to that idea, sometimes in ways players don't immediately notice. Cities like Castelia and Nimbasa feel bold, bright, and energetic symbols of progress, creativity, and human ambition. Meanwhile, places like Nakreen and Mistralton emphasize quiet craftsmanship, small-town culture, and natural history. These differences aren't just stylistic, they echo the philosophical split between the legendary dragons that shaped Unova's ancient past. The entire region feels like a living debate between the desire for change and the comfort of stability, played out across geography instead of words. The games reinforce this theme through the cast of characters you meet. Charon represents structure, logic, and measurable growth. Bianca represents uncertainty, emotion, and the desire to find one's place in the world. And N, the most mysterious of them all, stands apart from every trainer before him. His journey feels less like that of a rival and more like a wandering philosopher, someone whose worldview was shaped by isolation and carefully crafted lies. He doesn't challenge you because he wants power. He challenges you because he believes conflict is wrong. His interior conflict becomes the emotional heart of Black and White, creating a dynamic rarely seen in earlier Pokemon games. Instead of overcoming a rival, you help someone find themselves. N's connection to the ancient dragons is woven into the narrative long before the player realizes it. His unusual empathy for Pokemon, his ability to understand them without translation, and his discomfort around human society all hint at something deeper inside him. A lineage tied to the original heroes who once split a single great dragon into two. N doesn't know his own heritage until the truth is revealed, but the game leaves clues everywhere. Statues, murals, and ruins emphasize the cyclical nature of history, showing how ideals and truth have clashed before, and how they will inevitably clash again. The idea that N is repeating the journey of a long-lost hero adds a quiet layer of destiny beneath every encounter you share with him. Another detail that makes Black and White unique is how its world feels alive even when you're standing still. The seasons system brings subtle changes to the region that most players only fully appreciate long after the fact. Snow piles up in Driftvale, leaves change colors in Pinwheel Forest, and the shade around the bridges shifts with the time of year. These environmental changes aren't dramatic, but they create a sense of realism that was unprecedented in Pokemon at the time. Even the music adapts in small ways, using warm tones in summer and softer bells in winter. Without ever calling attention to it directly, the game invites players to slow down, breathe, and experience the world as something that evolves with time. Nowhere is this more evident than on the iconic bridges of Unova. Skyaro Bridge remains one of the most awe-inspiring moments in the entire franchise, a space where scale suddenly becomes real. The camera shifts, the perspective widens, and for a moment, the player feels like a traveler crossing an enormous landmark rather than simply walking across a tile set. The wind blows across the railings, the hum of distant traffic echoes beneath the structure, and the music swells with a sense of adventure. It was the first time Pokemon felt vast, a world much larger than the screen could contain. The designers of Black and White didn't just want players to visit Unova. They wanted players to feel like they were stepping into a region deeply connected to culture, mythology, and human behavior. Locations, such as the desert resort, hide fragments of an older civilization, hinting at the presence of ancient kings who ruled long before the modern Unova League existed. Artifacts found in Relic Castle paint a picture of a forgotten empire, one that once coexisted with the first form of the legendary dragons. Even though the game never tells this history outright, the clues scattered through its ruins create a vivid sense of a world older than the modern conflicts of the region. One of the most fascinating aspects of the games is how many trainers reference philosophy directly. Gym leaders discuss personal beliefs, Elite Four members ponder existence, and even random NPCs talk about purpose, identity, and the relationship between humans and Pokemon. The writers treated Black and White not just as a story, but as a conversation, one that invites players to think about the meaning of partnership, freedom, and destiny within the Pokemon universe. These themes are reflected in everything from the architecture of Nacrene City to the propaganda posters inside plasma facilities. Even when the player doesn't consciously register it, the game is slowly building an atmosphere where nothing is purely black or white despite the title. The music of Black and White reinforces this emotional depth through its compositions, many of which remain among the most critically praised in the series. The Dragon Spiral Tower theme feels ancient, echoing the weight of forgotten centuries. The Entralink theme sounds like a dream half remembered, floating somewhere between reality and myth. And the Team Plasma battle theme pulses with urgency, creating a feeling that the conflict isn't just a simple fight, it's something personal for everyone involved. These musical choices lift the game's atmosphere from familiar adventure to philosophical epic, making each location feel like a unique, emotional landscape. Even the Pokemon introduced in Black and White reflect the region's themes. Many of them embody contrasts: physical versus spiritual, industrial versus natural, simplicity versus complexity. The designs push boundaries while staying rooted in folklore, science, and culture. It's the only generation where players are forced to use only new Pokemon during the main story, ensuring that Unova's creatures feel like a cohesive ecosystem rather than a collection of returning favorites. That decision, bold at the time, helped solidify Unova's identity as a region that stands alone, not dependent on nostalgia to feel complete. One detail players often overlook is how much the NPC dialogue changes depending on your progress. Early in the game, some characters express uncertainty about Team Plasma's ideals. Later, once Plasma's true motives come to light, those same characters develop clearer convictions. This dynamic world building shows how public opinion shifts with events something rarely emphasized in past regions. It creates the feeling that Unova isn't static. It evolves as you do, reacting to the ripples created by N, Getsus, and the player's choices. Even the ending of Black and White breaks tradition in a way that aligns perfectly with its themes. Instead of simply defeating the champion, the final confrontation becomes a layered climax involving personal belief, legendary awakening, and emotional resolution. N's castle, rising from beneath the Pokémon League, is more than a dramatic set piece. It symbolizes the upheaval of tradition, the challenge of long-held beliefs, and the clash between inherited stories and modern understanding. It turns the final battle into something beautiful and human, not about winning, but about understanding. And as you move deeper into Unova, through forests touched by ancient myths and cities buzzing with modern life, the region continues to whisper its central truth, that ideals and truth are not opposites, but two perspectives of the same story. Black and White isn't a tale told in extremes. It's a lullaby about harmony, a region where every shadow has light nearby, and every bright place carries its own mysteries beneath the surface. Unova has always carried a feeling of forward momentum, a region built not just on the idea of exploration, but on the idea of connection, movement, and renewal. And nowhere is that more clear than in the deeper layers of Pokémon Black and White, where the world quietly reveals how carefully every piece was placed. Players have long noticed that Unova feels different compared to previous regions, as if the entire map is arranged to guide you, not just through routes and cities, but through themes. The region begins with the comfort of suburbia in Nuvema town, pushes you through the hopeful energy of Accumula, and then throws you into the rising chaos around Team Plasma, all before you even earn your first few badges. That pacing wasn't accidental. Developers once explained that Unova was designed to make players feel like they were growing alongside the region, watching it change the same way a newcomer watches a sprawling city become familiar over time. One of the most fascinating things about Unova is how many locations subtly react to player progress. The musical changes in Castelia, the deeper tones in Route 4 after construction begins, the haunting emptiness of the desert resort, everything reflects a world in transition. Even the NPC dialogue shifts depending on story beats more dynamically than in many earlier Pokémon games. This was the first generation where the developers embraced the idea that a region could behave like a living character, evolving with the story rather than remaining static. Another detail players often miss is how many environmental storytelling cues appear long before their payoff. In early routes, billboards hint at upcoming companies you'll later interact with. Posters in Nimbasa quietly reference characters like Alessa before you meet her. Even the simple layout of Castelia City foreshadows its role as a hub of conflict, an overwhelming maze of alleyways, docks, and skyscrapers that mirrors the complexity of the storyline. Castelia wasn't just meant to be big, it was meant to feel like the kind of place where secrets could hide in plain sight. The wild Pokémon distribution in Black and White also tells a quiet story. Because the developers chose to include only brand new species in the initial regional Pokédex, they essentially created a soft reboot of the franchise's identity. For the first time, players went into a region knowing none of the early route encounters. There were no Pidgey, no Rattata, no Zubat waiting in every cave. Instead, everything felt fresh. That decision was bold, and it influenced how players formed attachments to the Unova roster. Even common Pokémon like Lillipup and Roggenrola became beloved because they weren't competing with older mascots for relevance. This created a generation of fans who grew up with Unova as their first true mystery region, where discovery wasn't nostalgic, it was immediate. Unova's gym leaders also reflect that desire for freshness. They weren't just badge dispensers, they were integral characters with arcs that connected to the region's larger themes. Lenora's role as a museum director subtly ties Unova's present to its ancient past. Elisa's involvement in Bianca's story reinforces the idea of personal growth and supportive mentorship. Clay's stubborn, grounded demeanor highlights the region's relationship with labor and industry. And Drayden and Iris, who share leadership of Opelucid City, symbolize the coexistence of tradition and youthfulness, something the two versions of the game express beautifully through their contrasting city designs. Speaking of version differences, Black and White remains some of the most ambitious games in the series when it comes to altering content between versions. Opelucid City transforms completely depending on the version, a futuristic metropolis in white, a traditional dragon-themed stronghold in black. The theme isn't just visual, it reflects the philosophical divide between Reshiram and Zekrom. Players often describe walking into Opelucid as the moment where they truly understood what the games were trying to say. That truth and ideals aren't just concepts for legendary Pokémon, but lenses through which entire cultures evolve. This duality appears elsewhere too. Black City and White Forest stand as opposites. One a bustling futuristic economy, the other a serene natural preserve. Their population and available encounters depend on how players interact with others via the Entralink system. Although many fans never fully used these features, they were meant to show how different worlds could grow richer through connection, echoing the game's core themes. Team Plasma remains one of the most complex villain groups in Pokémon history. Their philosophy, that humans and Pokémon should be separated for everyone's freedom, was unusually thoughtful for a children's game, and the story's twist that Getsus manipulates this ideology for personal gain adds a layer of political realism rarely seen in the series. But one of the most overlooked storytelling mechanics is how Plasma members behave after key story events. Their battle dialogue, their confidence levels, even their presence in certain towns shifts dramatically as the player progresses. The world reacts to their crumbling ideology long before the climax, making the entire region feel like it's holding its breath as N grows more conflicted. N's castle remains one of the most cinematic set pieces ever added to a Pokémon game. The way it rises around the Pokémon League after the last gym battle, interrupting tradition, rewriting the narrative mid-sentence, was a powerful statement. Players weren't just entering a villain's lair. They were witnessing the region's history being rewritten in real time. Many fans still remember that sequence as one of the most shocking moments in the franchise, not because of danger or stakes, but because the world they thought they understood suddenly changed its rules right in front of them. Even smaller details reinforce the emotional depth of Unova's storytelling. The musical changes when N speaks, the soft flute-like motifs that follow him, and the melancholy tone of his personal rooms all contribute to a feeling of loneliness rarely explored in Pokémon. Players often note how his room is filled with toys and puzzles, signs of a childhood engineered rather than lived. It's one of those moments where the game invites empathy without needing to explain everything. You simply feel the weight of N's isolation. Areas like the Relic Castle add to that atmosphere with their quiet, ancient energy. The way sand pours through the ceiling, the spiraling descent into forgotten chambers, and the hints about Valcarona's role in ancient Unovan culture all contribute to a sense that the region's history is much deeper than what's shown on the surface. The developers later expanded on this idea in Black 2 and White 2, but the seeds were planted in the original games, a lost civilization, a guardian of sun and flame, and ruins that refuse to collapse completely, as if waiting for someone to remember their story. Unova's soundtrack deserves its own recognition, too. It wasn't just music, it was atmosphere. Roots had dynamic layers that changed based on your location or how many instruments NPCs added to the track. Nimbasa's themes captured the electric energy of carnival lights and racing stadiums. Driftvale's theme was grounded, rhythmic, and heavy, perfectly mirroring Clay's character. And Accumula's theme, soft, calm, almost nostalgic, created one of the most unforgettable early game moments in the entire series during N's first speech. The music didn't just accompany the journey, it enriched it, shaping the emotional texture of each location. Even the Pokemon League in Black and White carries a unique atmosphere. The way torches illuminate the Elite Four chambers, the winding staircases, and the sense of reverence all contribute to the game's overarching themes of truth, ideals, and personal evolution. Each chamber represents a different philosophical viewpoint, reflected not only in aesthetic choices, but in the Elite Four members themselves. Caitlin's serene, dreamlike room contrasts sharply with Grimsley's gambling-inspired design, and both feel deeply tied to their personalities. But perhaps one of the subtlest, most impactful details of all is how Black and White treat the player character. Unlike some earlier games where the protagonist felt like a blank slate, Unova's story acknowledges the player's presence more directly. Characters consistently comment on your actions, your relationships, and your growth. Bianca's insecurities, Charon's drive for strength, and N's conflicted admiration all tie back to how they see you. In a quiet way, the game teaches that one person's journey can influence the people around them, even without grand gestures. All of these threads, the dynamic towns, the shifting tone, the emotional arcs, the careful design, come together to create an experience that feels bigger than the sum of its parts. Pokémon Black and White didn't just introduce new Pokémon, new villains, and new mechanics. They introduced a new kind of storytelling. A story where truth and ideals could coexist, where characters could struggle and grow, and where the world itself felt alive enough to breathe along with you as you played. And somewhere within the lights of Castelia or the quiet grasses of Route 1, that sense of discovery still lingers. Unova remains a place where every corner hides intention, every shadow hints at history, and every gentle musical cue invites the player to keep going, not because of challenge or pressure, but because the region feels like it wants to share something with you, softly and patiently, one moment at a time. Unova has always felt like a region built on movement, shaped by people who were constantly searching for something new, and Black and White captured that spirit in every detail of their design. Even the pacing of the journey reflects it. Instead of giving players access to wild encounters everywhere from the beginning, the game slowly opens the region, revealing more and more pieces of Unova like chapters unfolding in a book. And because every area is inspired by real New York landmarks, the sense of progression feels like traveling through a living, breathing continent rather than a patchwork of towns. Places like Liberty Garden, Sky Arrow Bridge, and Nimbasa City weren't just locations, they were experiences. Sky Arrow Bridge especially became one of the most iconic transitional areas in the series. The camera shifts, the scale expands, and for a brief moment, the player is made to feel small in the best possible way. You walk forward and watch the world curve away on both sides, realizing that Unova is grander than anything that came before it. The sense of scale wasn't limited to geography. Black and White introduced the most ambitious cast of characters the series had ever seen, each with surprisingly human motivations. N remains one of the most complex and beloved characters in Pokémon history because he isn't written as a rival to defeat, but as someone trying to understand the world from a completely different angle. His quiet speeches about Pokémon liberation aren't delivered with villainous flair. They're spoken with genuine heartbreak. The fact that the game lets players walk into his room and see the toys he grew up with, a lonely reminder of the isolation he lived in, added a level of emotional realism that had never existed in mainline games. His story made Unova feel like a region full of moral questions, not just battles. Even Team Plasma, often compared to activist groups or cult movements, operated differently than past teams. Instead of trying to steal Pokemon outright, they convinced people to willingly release them. Many NPCs across the region talked openly about whether humans and Pokemon should live together, with some even agreeing with Team Plasma's ideals. This level of ideological conflict created a world where the player wasn't always told what to think, they were invited to consider the arguments themselves. For a Pokemon game, this was revolutionary. It made the world feel more alive, more contentious, more layered. It also made Ghetsis' deception feel far more sinister. He didn't lead a team of thugs. He manipulated idealists into serving his agenda, using N as an emotional weapon and building a philosophy he never believed in. When the truth is revealed, the betrayal hits harder than any standard villain twist. Unova's environmental storytelling also left a massive impression on players. Desert Resort and Relic Castle weren't just random sandy areas. They felt ancient, abandoned, full of half-buried secrets whispered by the wind. Castelia sewers in the sequels revealed an urban underbelly that matched the scale of the city above. The nature preserve felt untouched, like a sanctuary completely separate from the rest of Unova's busy world. Even Route 10, the final route before Victory Road, was crafted with a bittersweet atmosphere that players still talk about today. The music contributes heavily to this emotional design. Black and White has one of the strongest soundtracks in the franchise, with themes like N's Farewell, Emotion, Driftvale City, and the Pokémon League maintaining legendary status over a decade later. The music isn't just catchy, it's full of feeling, designed to match narrative beats instead of just filling silence. Another major step forward came from the way Black and White handled the regional Pokédex. For the first time since Generation 1, players were restricted to a completely new set of Pokémon until the post-game. This forced everyone to explore new strategies, discover new favorites, and adapt to new designs, instead of defaulting to familiar species. At first, some players pushed back, but by the end of the journey, the Unova roster developed one of the strongest cult followings in the series. Pokémon like Chandelure, Crocodile, Haxorus, Galvantula, Ferrothorn, Volcarona, and Hydreigon became meta-defining monsters. Others like Zoroark and Braviary became fan favorites for their personalities and lore. And the starters, Snivy, Tepig, and Oshawott, each represented a different kind of charm, from Snivy's smug elegance to Oshawott's emotional expressiveness. These new Pokémon came with one of the most thematically ambitious legendary lineups ever created. The Tau Trio, Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem, were more than mythical beasts. They were narrative symbols representing truth, ideals, and the void between them. Their lore tied directly into the central conflict between the heroes and Team Plasma. Even the Swords of Justice had a purpose beyond just being optional mythics. They represented rebellion, mentorship, sacrifice, and unity. Every legendary felt connected to history, to morality, or to cultural myths within Unova. And because the characters in the game talked about these legends like living stories instead of abstract fantasies, the region felt grounded in a way that previous generational myths hadn't managed. Even the battlefield visuals pushed forward the series' identity. Fully animated sprites gave every Pokémon personality, with iconic movements like Scrafty pulling up its pants, Chandelure swaying like a ghost lamp, or Ferrothorn rotating its metal vines. These animations made the world feel alive long before 3D models became standard. Many fans still argue that Generation 5's sprite work is the most expressive in the entire franchise. Combined with dynamic camera angles during attacks, battles felt dramatic, fluid, and more cinematic than the series had ever been. Even small details, like the way the camera zoomed during gym leader finales, added excitement to every encounter. Unova's gym leaders are also remembered as some of the strongest and most unique in the franchise. Elisa's fashion-forward electric team, Clay's stern confidence, Bryson's stoic presence, and Drayden's commanding authority all left lasting impressions. The fact that leaders often appeared outside their gyms to influence the story made them feel like real people rather than static challenge NPCs. Charon and Bianca's transitions from rivals to independent trainers added even more depth. Bianca's gentle uncertainty and Charon's desire for strength created emotional arcs rarely seen in previous rival characters. And Alder, the champion whose story centered on grief, separation, and healing, felt like a genuine mentor rather than just an endgame obstacle. The postgame in Black and White expanded that depth further. Areas like Black City and White Forest changed depending on player interactions. The Royal Unova ship added a daily challenge with a sense of luxury and travel. Cynthia's cameo connected Unova back to Sinnoh, suggesting a larger Pokémon world shared by wandering champions and moving stories. Even the music in the postgame, particularly the Village Bridge theme with its layered instrumentation, felt alive, as if players had walked into a world where people lived normal lives instead of simply waiting for battle. Unova's design philosophy didn't just innovate for the sake of novelty, it created an emotional identity for a region that remains unmatched. The mixture of urban scale, rural serenity, ancient ruins, and ideological conflict created an environment where lore wasn't just read, it was experienced. Every character had a motivation, every location had a sense of history, and every moment felt like a step forward for the franchise. In many ways, Black and White represented Pokémon at its most ambitious, not because it added more content, but because it trusted players to think, to feel, and to reflect. And when you look back at the journey, the bustling streets of Castelia City, the glowing grass on Route 3, the quiet breeze over Village Bridge, the electric music of Nimbasa, the moonlit shadow of Lacunosa Town, the dark walls of Relic Castle, it becomes clear why so many fans still consider Unova a masterpiece. It wasn't just a region, it was a story, a world, a feeling, one that continues to pull players back, even years later, whenever they want to remember what it felt like to walk across Sky Arrow Bridge for the first time and realize just how big Pokémon could be. The world of Pokémon Black and White continues to unfold like a long, slow breath, expanding outward from the familiar stories people already know into the quieter details that often go unnoticed. As Unova's journey deepens, so does the sense that this region was crafted with an unusual level of intention, almost as if every moment and every place carries a subtle message beneath the surface. Black and White were games built on contrasts, truth and ideals, reality and belief, tradition and modernity, but beyond the grand themes lies a tapestry of smaller, quieter facts that reveal just how thoughtfully Unova was designed. And when you move at a peaceful pace, letting the lore breathe, those details begin to rise like ripples across calm water. One of the most fascinating aspects of Black and White is how heavily they were inspired by real-world New York City, not just in visuals but in structure. The verticality of Castelia City, the bridges, the suburbs, the fields pushing outward toward the region's edges, they all mimic the shape of a metropolis, surrounded by living, evolving communities. The game leans into this by gradually expanding the world as you progress, letting the player experience what feels like a rising skyline, a growing sense of scale. Even the routes change in tone as they radiate outward from Nuvema town. Some feel rural, some suburban, some industrial. It's as though the region is a living creature, breathing through its roads and towns, waiting to reveal truths hidden behind its quiet corners. One of these quiet corners lies in the heart of Accumula town. This seemingly simple area holds one of the most important early themes of the game, the moment when Team Plasma delivers their first speech. What many players don't notice the first time through is how the soundtrack subtly shifts the moment Getsus begins speaking. The warm, comforting melody of Accumula suddenly cools into something sharper, as if the music itself is warning the player that the speech is not just a speech, it's the opening note of the region's internal conflict. Black and White are filled with these musical cues, moments where the soundtrack isn't just background noise, but an emotional guide that shapes how players feel without ever saying a word. The musical storytelling continues in places like Driftvale City, where the calm, almost melancholic guitar melody reflects Clay's hardworking, grounded personality, and in Nimbasa City, where energetic rhythms burst into life like a theme park in full swing. One lesser-known detail is that Nimbasa's Ferris wheel theme subtly changes depending on who rides with the player, matching the emotional tone of the character's conversation. This level of nuance is rare even in modern games, yet Black and White perfected it over a decade ago, using music as emotional world building rather than a simple backdrop. Another subtle element lies in how the game presents its gym leaders. In earlier generations, gym leaders existed mostly as boss fights with distinct types. In Black and White, they feel human in ways the series had rarely shown before. Sillin, Chili, and Cress run a full restaurant. Elisa works as a fashion model and embodies her city's glamour. Bryson hides his identity behind an actor's mask, representing the tension between public persona and private truth. And of course, Lenora's occupation as a museum director is one of the strongest examples of a gym leader's theme aligning with their profession. Her gym doubles as a natural history museum, and her puzzle incorporates the idea of uncovering truth from artifacts, a quiet symbolic nod to Black and White's deeper themes long before the story spells them out. Even more subtle is how the Elite Four represent philosophical archetypes rather than just types. Grimsley embodies risk and probability, borrowing themes from gambling culture. Caitlin reflects emotional balance and inner conflict. Marshall represents discipline and self-overcoming. And Chantal symbolizes the idea that stories themselves can shape fate. These roles go beyond battling. They represent the different forms truth can take: logical truth, emotional truth, physical truth, and narrative truth. By the time the story reaches N's castle, these ideas converge, framing the final confrontation as something more than a traditional battle. It's the culmination of every philosophical strand the game has woven quietly through its world. Another overlooked detail is how expansive and interconnected Unova's wilderness is. Chargestone Cave, for instance, doesn't just exist as an electric-themed dungeon. It's a symbolic reflection of energy pulsing through the region, a natural heart where power gathers and moves. The floating stones represent magnetic forces that subtly guide the player forward, turning the environment itself into a living puzzle. That same sense of environmental symbolism appears in Victory Road, which is structured as a winding, multi-layered climb instead of a linear path. It feels like a physical representation of the player's journey, difficult, expansive, and filled with hidden shortcuts that only become clear once you've explored enough to understand its structure. One of the most beautiful areas in the entire region is the village bridge, a place many players simply pass through without listening closely. If you linger long enough, the soundtrack gradually layers new instruments, a soft guitar, a singer's gentle hum, even the plucking of strings from hidden musicians scattered around the area. These layers combine into one of the most peaceful, immersive pieces of music in the entire franchise, but it only fully plays if you stop and let it grow naturally. It's as if the game rewards patience with serenity, a message perfectly in line with Black and White's overall philosophy. The story's pacing reinforces this theme of stillness. Unlike many games where action builds rapidly, Black and White deliberately place quiet moments before major events. Moments like standing on the Driftvale drawbridge while feathers fall gently from the sky, or encountering Bianca during her reflective character arcs. The game isn't afraid to slow down and let the player breathe, encouraging reflection rather than rushing forward. And this is why its emotional moments hit so deeply. The quiet makes the loud more powerful. Even the Pokémon designs in Unova contain layers of meaning. Many Pokémon introduced in Gen 5 were intentionally crafted to resemble a reboot of the franchise, mirroring the spirit of beginning again. That's why so many early root Pokémon feel like thematic echoes of past designs. Lillipup as a new Rattata-like companion, Pidove as a new early bird, Blitzel taking the place of Electrike-like early electric types. But the key difference is that Unova's Pokémon weren't just new for the sake of being new, they were reinterpretations meant to reflect a fresh start. When the game locks players into using only Unova Pokémon during the main story, it reinforces this feeling of discovery, that everything you meet is unfamiliar and every bond you form is fresh rather than inherited from previous generations. One beautiful detail many players miss is how the game subtly encourages empathy through its Pokédex entries. Unova's Pokémon often have emotional backstories, the gentle nature of Deerling shifting with the seasons, the expressiveness of Minccino cleaning everything it touches, or the loyalty of Lillipup hiding bravery behind its soft appearance. These small details build emotional weight, making the region feel alive with personality. Even the darker entries, like those belonging to Litwick or Yamask, serve to remind players that the world isn't just vibrant, it's complex, filled with history and memory. Mistralton Cave carries one of the most mysterious pieces of lore in the region. Its hidden chamber, where the legendary swordsman Cobalion rests, holds ancient carvings depicting a time when disaster threatened Unova. These carvings hint at deep history, the swords of justice rising against human cruelty, protecting Pokémon from harm. Though the game never explicitly reveals the full story, the implications are powerful that even in the past, the struggle between truth and ideals existed, and that those who fought to protect the innocent became legends. This idea of ancient conflict resurfaces in the Relic Castle, a place built on sand and time. Its spiraling descent feels like falling through centuries of forgotten history, each layer revealing fragments of a civilization long gone. Statues, collapsed floors, and cryptic hieroglyphs all suggest a culture fascinated with power and control, one that may have collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. Whether this culture is directly connected to the creation of Volcarona or the sand-bound past of Unova's desert, the game leaves intentionally ambiguous. It offers the player a mystery without fully answering it, encouraging imagination instead of certainty. And at the center of everything stands N, a character whose emotional depth remains one of Pokémon's greatest achievements. His gentle voice, his idealistic heart, his internal conflict between love for Pokémon and confusion about human intentions all of these make him feel real. He speaks like someone who sees the world differently, and the game frames him not as an enemy, but as someone who lost his way through manipulation. The moment he releases his Pokémon after the final battle, as if letting go of a lifelong burden, remains one of the most emotional scenes in Pokémon history. It ties the themes together perfectly, that truth and ideals are not enemies, but perspectives that become meaningful only when understood together. Black and White don't simply tell a story, they invite the player into a philosophy. They ask what it means to believe in something, to search for truth, to question inherited ideas, and to find balance between tradition and change. They challenge players not through difficulty, but through introspection. And that is why the games linger in memory long after the credits roll. Unova is not just a region, it is a meditation on growth. From the shifting seasons to the evolving relationships between characters, everything moves with emotional intention. The world isn't static. It breathes, transforms, and responds. And every time you revisit it, you find something new hidden in the quiet, waiting patiently to be seen. There is something quietly magical about how Pokémon Black and White use the idea of perspective, not just in graphics, but in storytelling. The Unova region, with its tall bridges, glimmering cities, and carefully layered backgrounds, was the first Pokémon world designed to feel like a living, breathing ecosystem built upward instead of outward. As you journey across its landscapes, you sense the designers experimenting with scale and motion, trying to immerse the player in the feeling of walking through a region that felt modern, ambitious, and alive. When you step onto Sky Arrow Bridge for the first time, the camera pulls back, stretches outward, and slowly rotates around your character. It was one of the earliest moments where the Pokémon games said, quietly but confidently, "Look how far we've come." And players felt that the slow sway of the cables, the distant hum of wind, the tiny details moving in the background, all creating a sense of depth unlike anything the series had attempted before. Unova, as a whole, was built on that sense of reinvention. Where previous regions drew heavily from Japanese geography, Unova was modeled after New York City, representing diversity and energy rather than tradition. Castelia City, with its towering skyscrapers and bustling piers, feels nothing like the quaint towns of past games. Instead, it buzzes with personalities, from eccentric office workers to street artists and businessmen rushing down sidewalks. The city's vertical design, its alleyways, and even the glimmering river dividing it evoke a sense of scale and density that hadn't existed in Pokémon before. Walking through its streets at night, with the glow of street lamps reflecting off the water, feels almost like stepping into a city that continues living even when you put the game down. This shift in design philosophy extended far beyond visuals. Black and White is the only Pokémon generation that introduced a full regional Pokédex of entirely new species, ensuring that every wild encounter was unfamiliar. That sensation of discovery had largely faded by the time earlier generations released, but in Unova, players started from zero again. No Rattata, no Zubat, no Geodude, none of the familiar wildlife that had populated earlier regions. Instead, every Pokémon you met was a complete surprise. The developers intentionally withheld nostalgic creatures during the main story, so players could experience Unova as if it were truly foreign territory, just as the main characters do. This design choice gave the region its own identity and encouraged players to build new teams instead of relying on old favorites. It remains one of the boldest decisions in Pokémon history, and yet, even in this modern region, Unova's story remains rooted in themes older than any Pokédex entry: the question of what it means to form bonds, the meaning of freedom, and the uncertainty that comes with challenging the status quo. Nowhere is this clearer than in the arc surrounding N, one of the most complex characters ever written for the series. From the moment he introduces himself, speaking softly but with sincerity, it becomes clear that he sees the world differently. His desire to liberate Pokémon isn't a simple villain's plot. It's rooted in genuine empathy shaped by a life of isolation. Raised in a castle, surrounded by only Pokémon and carefully manipulated truths, he believes wholeheartedly that humans harm the creatures they claim to love. Battling him, therefore, doesn't feel like defeating an antagonist. It feels like trying to communicate with someone who desperately wants to understand the world, but never had the chance to see its full picture. The game reinforces this emotional complexity through subtle details. When you battle N, the background shifts into a surreal, almost dreamlike environment, separating him visually from every other trainer. His Pokémon are ones he befriended directly in the wild, not captured through the usual means, reflecting his belief in natural bonds. Even his speech patterns shift depending on his emotional state, gentle at first, more pained as the story progresses, and eventually full of quiet realization during the climax atop N's castle. Few Pokémon games before or since have offered a rival whose worldview evolves so openly in front of the player, making Unova's narrative one of personal growth rather than simple conflict. One of the most striking elements of this story is the appearance of N's castle itself, an enormous structure emerging dramatically from beneath the Pokémon League. The moment the ground trembles and the walls rise skyward feels almost mythological. It transforms a familiar gameplay moment into something cinematic and unexpected. It's rare in Pokémon for the setting itself to shift so drastically around the player, but in Black and White, the world reacts dramatically to the presence of Team Plasma. Inside the castle, the atmosphere shifts between grandeur and eeriness. Plush carpets line the floor, but beneath the surface is an emptiness, an emotional distance that echoes N's upbringing. Pokémon roam the halls freely, cared for by the Seven Sages, yet the space feels constructed, a gilded cage built not for N's comfort, but for his obedience. That duality of appearance versus intention appears throughout Team Plasma's design. Unlike previous villain teams, their mission sounds noble on the surface. They speak of liberation, justice, and compassion. Their uniforms mimic medieval knights, evoking imagery of protectors rather than aggressors. But beneath that symbolism lies manipulation, Getsis using idealism as a mask for control. This makes the narrative feel more grounded, more emotionally complex than a simple plot about crime or domination. The conflict in Unova isn't about stopping destruction, it's about understanding the difference between genuine kindness and twisted ideology. This thematic depth is part of why Black and White remains so admired among longtime fans. Another highlight of Unova's world building comes from its ancient legends, particularly those surrounding the Tau Trio, Reshiram, Zekrom, and the truth and ideal-driven mythology that binds them. The way the games weave these legends into the modern world feels elegant, showing how stories evolve over time while still shaping the present. The idea that two brothers founded Unova, aligning themselves with ideals and truth, mirrors the conflict between N and the player. Even the Dragon Stones, resting silently until awakened by a worthy heart, stand as metaphors for internal conviction. Unova's legends don't just fill the region with mythical creatures, they act as narrative mirrors, reflecting the emotional core of the story. And yet, Black and White balance all this narrative weight with stretches of peaceful exploration that allow the player to breathe. Routes like the one leading to Village Bridge offer tranquility rarely found in Pokémon games. The soft music gradually layers instruments as you walk, creating one of the most atmospheric pieces in the entire soundtrack. It's a reminder that despite its grand themes, Nova is still a world meant to be lived in, filled with small, quiet corners that feel deeply human. Even the NPCs reflect this sincerity, with many characters offering introspective comments about their lives, dreams, and regrets. These moments help ground the experience, making the region feel lived in rather than designed. This sense of emotional honesty extends to the way the game treats the Pokemon League. Instead of the usual straightforward progression through Elite Four rooms, Unova's League feels like a ceremonial pilgrimage. The chambers are vast, ornate, and filled with symbolic architecture. Each Elite Four member embodies a different form of power: martial discipline, spiritual introspection, intellectual curiosity, and emotional resolve. Their designs reflect Unova's themes of duality and balance, reminding players that strength comes in many forms. Facing them feels less like a test of skill and more like a journey through the philosophies of the region itself. And when the final battle arrives, not against the champion, but against N, and then Getsy's, the structure of traditional Pokemon storytelling fully breaks open. You're no longer proving strength for glory. You're fighting to free someone from manipulation, to heal a damaged worldview. It's one of the rare times in the franchise where the emotional stakes feel more important than the physical ones. Even after the battle, N's final scene, flying away on the back of his dragon, expressing quiet gratitude and a newfound understanding, remains one of the most powerful endings in Pokemon history. It's gentle, bittersweet, and filled with hope, much like the region itself. The post-game areas of Unova further reinforce the sense of exploration and rediscovery. Routes once inaccessible open into new lands, hidden groves reveal rare Pokemon, and the White Forest, Black City mechanic gives each version a unique post-story atmosphere. The return of older Pokemon species after the credits roll symbolizes the world opening wider, a subtle metaphor for how both the player and N learn to expand their perspectives. The message is timeless. Once you've grown, the world grows with you. And so Pokemon Black and White, with all their ambition, heart, and quiet complexity, continue to stand as some of the most thoughtfully crafted games in the series. Their atmosphere wraps around you like a soft blanket, modern yet nostalgic, emotional yet gentle, vast yet intimately human. Even now, walking through Castelia at dusk or crossing Sky Arrow Bridge under a fading orange sky feels like stepping into a dream you almost forgot you had. And somewhere in that dream, the story of Unova continues, patient and glowing, waiting quietly for you to return. The world of Pokemon Black and White becomes even more intriguing the deeper you wander into its quiet details, the small pieces of lore tucked into corners of the Unova region that most players only catch after returning years later. There's something dreamlike about how Unova blends the familiar structure of a Pokemon journey with a sense of reinvention. By this point in the adventure, the region begins revealing layers you didn't notice at first, subtle patterns, abandoned remnants of earlier times, and soft mysteries that speak through the quiet spaces between the big story beats. One of the most fascinating aspects of Black and White is how the region tells its history not through legends alone, but through atmosphere. So many areas in Unova seem frozen in time, as if holding on to fragments of stories long forgotten. Places like Driftvale's cold storage feel more like memories than locations, with old crates, industrial walkways, and that iconic fog that settles around your ankles. It's a setting that whispers about the region's working-class roots, a reminder that Unova is built not just on battles, but on labor, ships, and the quiet nights where dock workers once moved under dim lights. Even when no characters are present, the environment tells a story simply by how it looks and feels. Then there's the moody, lost-lorn forest, tucked away behind a winding path of grass and tall trees. At first glance, it seems like any other woodland, peaceful and quiet. But the more you explore, the more you sense that something is hiding beneath the silence. That traveling backpacker, the one who refuses to turn around or acknowledge what's behind him, ties into one of the most subtle Zoroark illusions in the entire franchise. The truth is never spoken aloud, but the air of mystery lingers. This forest doesn't rely on dialogue to create atmosphere. It uses emptiness, allowing players to fill the silence with their own curiosity. Unova's mysteries often work like that, not loud or flashy, but whispered through implication. Further into the region, there's something surreal about how Black and White handles technology. Unova is the first region inspired directly by a modern city, and you feel that evolution everywhere, from the looped subway systems to the massive Castelia skyline that rises like a steel forest. Yet even with all that technology, you can find pockets of old-world charm hiding in plain sight. Castelia's narrow back alley, for example, feels worlds away from the broad streets just a few steps outside. It captures that feeling of exploring a real city, where one turn can drop you into a quiet, forgotten corridor that seems untouched by the bright lights around it. That level of environmental storytelling was rare in earlier games, making Unova feel layered and alive. Even the characters that inhabit these spaces reflect this interplay between modernity and tradition. The street performers, the harlequins, the artists sketching in parks, they add personality to a region built on urban energy and creativity. Meanwhile, the musicians who join your background music, adding new layers to the soundtrack whenever you speak to them, create one of the most unique audio interactions in any Pokémon game. Those slight changes in melody feel like small secrets left behind for players who take their time instead of rushing from battle to battle. In a way, the game rewards curiosity with ambiance, enhancing the journey with details that feel personal. One detail that often slips past new players is how Unova subtly mirrors themes of truth and ideals even before the main plot verbalizes it. The region constantly contrasts nature and industry, tradition and innovation, unity and conflict. You see this in every corner of Unova. The wind turbines in Route 7 turning calmly against the sky, the busy ports of Driftvale moving goods from distant shores, the untouched serenity of the giant chasm hiding something ancient beneath ice and silence. It all creates a sense that the region itself is struggling to understand what it wants to become. This internal conflict is reflected in Black and White's focus on perspective, pushing players to question what they take for granted in a world filled with Pokémon. One of the most atmospheric areas in the entire game is Route 4, with its blend of sandy construction sites and makeshift housing. The vision for this route changes depending on which version you play, something few areas in the franchise attempt with such subtlety. In Black version, the desert creeps inward, the sand reclaiming parts of the industrial zone as if nature is gently resisting human expansion. In White version, progress pushes forward confidently, with finished roads and established structures showing human triumph over environment. Both routes speak to the game's underlying themes, two sides of the same region, just like the two dragons sleeping in ancient legend. The Desert Resort and Relic Castle expand on this idea with an almost meditative sense of decay. Sand pours endlessly through broken structures, ancient carvings peek through crumbling walls, and the music captures that floating, distant feeling of wandering through forgotten time. The Relic Castle doesn't scream lore at you, it lets you feel it. Every step you take deeper into its labyrinth, feels like moving through layers of memory, unearthing truths about the past that still ripple into the present. Even the shape of the castle hints at secrets, its spiraling halls resembling ancient Unovan symbolism of history, repeating until the truth is finally acknowledged. Then there's Village Bridge, one of the most unforgettable places in Unova, not because of battles or special items, but because of its atmosphere. The soft singing from a resident, the layered music that changes depending on who you talk to, the long stretch of path where water glides peacefully beneath your feet. It's a place designed for stillness. In a game filled with themes of duality and conflict, Village Bridge feels like a moment of rest, a reminder that even in a world wrestling with truth and ideals, there is space to breathe. Many players remember that bridge far more vividly than some major story events, simply because of how calm it feels. Meanwhile, the Chargestone Cave stands as one of Unova's most striking natural wonders. The glowing stones, gently humming with energy, create an almost dreamlike environment where gravity feels lighter than usual. The idea that Pokémon like Joltik absorb electricity from those stones, and that wild clink assemble machinery-like formations deep inside, helps the cave feel like a living ecosystem rather than a simple dungeon. Even the floating stones have a kind of quiet personality, shifting just slightly as if alive. The entire place feels like a pulse of the region, a natural heart beating beneath its modern exterior. Unova also uses its NPCs to reveal small truths about the world. In numerous houses, you'll find people talking about the shifting relationship between humanity and Pokémon. Some questioning whether humans really know what's best, others expressing doubts they never would have voiced in earlier regions. These small moments show how Black and White challenges expectations. It's the first game where ordinary people openly question the very structure of the Pokémon world, making Unova feel more philosophically grounded than any region before it. Even the Pokémon centers subtly contribute to this sense of reinvention. Their modern design, with clean technology and bright lighting, contrasts sharply with the rustic charm of earlier generations. They feel like real public hubs, places where people gather not just to heal Pokémon, but to socialize, rest, and observe the busy world around them. It's another small detail that strengthens Unova's atmosphere, reminding players that the region is inspired by the rhythm of modern life. Unova's routes also introduce a sense of verticality rarely seen in previous games. Routes like 18 and the surrounding currents create tricky water passages that feel like puzzle pieces scattered across a sea. Meanwhile, areas like Twist Mountain change with the seasons, showing how the environment shifts throughout the year. Snow fills different pathways, certain caves become inaccessible, and the music even changes to match the temperature in the air. It's a simple but powerful detail. The world feels alive, reacting to time, seasons, and change, just like the themes of the story itself. And, of course, the iconic Ferris wheel in Nimbasa City stands as one of Unova's most symbolic landmarks. The slow rotation, the glowing lights, the climb toward the sky, it's a moment of reflection disguised as a carnival ride. For many players, the first time riding it with N is one of the most memorable scenes in the entire game. The sky shifts colors, the world grows quiet, and for a moment, the story pauses so the characters can simply exist. It's subtle, introspective, and deeply human, hallmarks of Unova's storytelling. The region continues unfolding like this, through spaces that feel lived in and emotionally textured. Even places as simple as the Driftvale Drawbridge, with its flock of swana gliding through the air and its soft clattering sound beneath your feet, evoke a sense of movement and transience. Unova constantly reminds players that the world doesn't revolve around them. Life continues, with or without their presence. The bridges rise and fall, the seasons turn, and the lights of Castelia always shimmer in the distance, whether you're watching or not. And deep within this meticulously crafted region lies the real beauty of Pokémon Black and White. The sense that change is constant, that every place you visit has a past and a future, and that even the quietest corners carry stories waiting to be discovered. Unova isn't just a region, it's a reflection of growth, perspective, and the soft truths that exist when you're willing to slow down long enough to hear them. There is a certain quiet power that lingers in the Unova region as you move deeper into its story, a feeling that grows stronger the longer you spend within the world of Pokémon Black and White. Even long after the main adventure concludes, the region feels alive, carrying echoes of every step the player took across its diverse landscapes. This part of the journey is where the game begins to reveal layers that many players never notice on their first playthrough. Subtle details woven into the world's design, its characters, and the ideas that inspired its creation. For a game that emphasizes truth and ideals, it is appropriate that some of its most fascinating revelations hide quietly beneath the surface, waiting patiently for players to discover them at their own pace. One of the most beautiful aspects of Unova is the way it subtly mirrors New York City and its surrounding areas, not as a direct recreation, but as a thematic reinterpretation. You can sense this in the sprawling grid layout of Castelia City, whose towering skyscrapers and vast harbor reflect the grandeur of Manhattan. But the influence extends much further than architecture. The energy of the region, the ambition, the diversity, the movement, mirrors the dynamic atmosphere of a metropolis. When you walk through Castelia's crowded streets, each NPC represents a different dream, a different perspective, a different life. The developers wanted to capture the feeling of a city where people from countless backgrounds converge, bringing their stories with them. That sense of convergence is the quiet heartbeat of Unova. Black and White's approach to storytelling stands apart from every region that came before it. Instead of focusing solely on the journey to become champion, the game asks deeper questions. Questions about what it means to be a trainer, what it means for Pokémon to battle, and what it means to live alongside another living being. These themes rise gently to the surface through the actions of Team Plasma, whose message challenges traditional assumptions rather than simply serving as villainous noise. Their presence forces the player to reflect, even if only for a moment, on the nature of partnership, and although their intentions evolve into something darker, the seed of that philosophical doubt remains one of the series' most effective storytelling techniques. Black and White didn't just challenge characters, it challenged players. Even the gyms in Unova feel like statements rather than simple tests of strength. Berg's art-themed gym, hidden behind textures of dripping paint and giant canvases, isn't just stylistically unique. It reflects Castelia's role as a cultural hub. Clay's mining-themed gym represents the industrial power driving Driftvale's economy. Ilesa's dazzling runway gym embodies fashion, performance, and the electric thrill of modern entertainment. Each gym leader is woven into their city's identity, their personalities shaped by the communities they belong to. This harmony between gym and setting creates the sense that every city in Unova has a soul, and every gym leader is a living part of that soul. One of the single most fascinating aspects of Black and White's design is how heavily it focuses on the relationships between characters. Charon's pursuit of strength, Bianca's search for self-worth, and N's search for truth all progress in parallel with the player's journey. For the first time, rivals don't feel like simple obstacles. They feel like mirrors. Charon reflects ambition but lacks direction. Bianca reflects insecurity, but grows into someone who understands her own value. And N reflects idealism, shaped by manipulation yet yearning for something real. The player becomes the anchor around which all three of these emotional arcs evolve. This creates a kind of narrative harmony that is rare in Pokémon storytelling, where character growth is often subtle rather than spoken. The region's soundtrack deepens this emotional resonance. Unova's music carries an unmistakable sense of unity between theme and environment. The gentle guitar of Accumula Town, the urban drums and jazz undertones of Castelia, the sweeping orchestral power of the Champion theme, each track paints its own emotional atmosphere. One detail fans love is the way certain towns introduce layers to their music when you interact with NPCs. Accumula Town is the most famous example, where musicians gradually join in as you talk to them, transforming the tune into a full ensemble. This interactive musical design reinforces the theme of connection, as though every voice in Unova contributes to the world's harmony. Black and White's decision to introduce over 150 new Pokémon and temporarily restrict the regional Pokédex to only Unova species created one of the series' most immersive experiences. For the first time since the early Game Boy titles, players couldn't rely on nostalgic favorites. Every route was a mystery again. Every encounter carried suspense. The sense of genuine adventure, that feeling of stepping into a world where everything is unfamiliar, made the region feel massive and mysterious. And as players grew attached to these new Pokémon, Unova developed its own identity, separate from the legacy of previous regions. Behind the scenes, the developers intentionally designed Unova as the farthest region geographically from Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, and Sinnoh. This distance wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. They wanted players to feel separated from what they already knew, so that every discovery would feel fresh. Even the decision to base the region off a real-world location outside Japan reflected that desire for thematic distance. By stepping away from familiar landscapes, the developers opened creative space to explore new ideas, new cultures, and new philosophies. It was the beginning of Pokémon's push toward global identity, a world no longer bound to a singular cultural influence. One of Unova's most underrated storytelling elements is its attention to time. Many locations subtly change depending on whether you visit during day or night. Lights flicker on in Castelia City, NPCs follow daily routines, and certain Pokémon appear only under specific conditions. This sense of passing time adds depth, making the region feel alive even when the player isn't watching. The season system enhances this further. In winter, snow drifts gather along routes, transforming the landscape into something quiet and serene. In spring, flowers bloom in vibrant patches. Summer brings gentle breezes, and autumn sprinkles golden leaves along the edges of trails. These changes aren't just cosmetic. They influence gameplay, access points, and encounters. Unova breathes through the seasons, embodying the theme of natural cycles. Another quietly brilliant piece of world-building appears in the Village Bridge, one of the most atmospheric locations in the entire franchise. As players cross the long wooden structure, layers of sound slowly fade in. A soft hum, distant chanting, someone strumming a guitar. Like Accumula Town, each element emerges only when the player engages with the NPCs who create it. The result is a uniquely peaceful moment, an auditory tribute to community and connection. It stands as one of the most beloved sequences in Black and White because it captures the heart of Unova's message. A world is shaped not just by battles, but by the voices of the people who live in it. Even Team Plasma, for all their complexity, plays a crucial role in the region's philosophical identity. Their initial message, that Pokémon deserve freedom, is delivered with such conviction that even the player can't dismiss it immediately. The game never mocks them for questioning the ethics of Pokémon training. Instead, it allows that question to exist as a real idea worth contemplating. This bold narrative choice elevated Black and White above traditional villain stories, grounding it in moral ambiguity. When the truth about Team Plasma's leadership is revealed, that their ideology was manipulated to serve a more selfish goal, the emotional impact is stronger precisely because the question they raised was sincere. Unova's lore deepens further through its legendary Pokémon Reshiram and Zekrom. Embodiments of truth and ideals are some of the most thematically integrated legendaries in the series. Their relationship with the twin heroes of ancient Unova mirrors the game's modern narrative, where N must choose which principle to embrace. The idea that legends are shaped by the heart of the person who summons them reinforces the central theme of perspective. Truth and ideals are not weapons, they're reflections of belief. Even Kyurem's hollow, incomplete form ties into this narrative, representing what happens when truth and ideals lose balance. Perhaps the most powerful part of Black and White's storytelling is how it handles the ending of the player's journey. After the events at N's castle, after the dramatic confrontation between the dragons, after the truth is revealed, the world doesn't return to normal immediately. There's a quiet, reflective space where the player can see the aftermath. NPCs discuss the impact of what happened, and N's absence lingers like a soft ache. It's one of the few Pokémon endings that acknowledges emotional weight rather than simply celebrating victory. These quiet details, these gentle touches, are what make Unova unforgettable. It's a region built not just on geography, but on meaning, a place where every building, every song, every character contributes to a larger theme. It is a world that asks questions, celebrates diversity, and rewards patience. Even after countless hours, wandering through its forests and cities still feels like wandering through a memory, something familiar, yet endlessly rich with new discoveries. And in that quiet space, as the journey winds down, the player realizes something subtle. Unova didn't just tell a story, it invited them to live inside one. Unova has always felt like a region built on contrast, and nowhere is that more apparent than in the final stretch of its lore. By the time trainers reach the end of their journey in Pokémon Black and White, the world around them feels richer, deeper, and more alive than when they first stepped out of New Vema Town. Every route, every conversation, and every abandoned piece of architecture adds to the quiet mystery that Unova carries beneath its polished exterior. Even the smallest details reveal how intentionally the region was designed, blending themes of truth, ideals, unity, and change into the landscape itself. One of the most fascinating elements of Unova is how its cities evolve alongside the player's understanding. Nimbasa City, for example, seems at first like pure entertainment: bright lights, music, theme parks, stadiums filled with cheering crowds. But underneath the surface, it reflects the idea that spectacle draws people together, but also distracts them from what lies beneath. Many fans point out that Nimbasa subtly mirrors the themes of the version mascots: light, distraction, and movement representing the pursuit of ideals. Even the Ferris wheel, a quiet landmark surrounded by noise, becomes a place where several important conversations in the game occur. It represents stillness within chaos, a recurring idea in Black and White that players don't notice until much later. Undella Town offers the opposite type of atmosphere, a place defined by silence. The music here is famously calm, a soft piano that feels almost hollow in its isolation. Many players notice that Undella feels less like a vacation spot and more like a place where something once happened, and that intuition proves correct when they discover the abyssal ruins offshore. Those ruins don't explain themselves, they simply exist, filled with indecipherable script and relics whose meanings are never fully revealed. It's one of the few places in mainline Pokémon designed to remain mysterious forever. The game leaves players with more questions than answers on purpose, embracing the idea that not every piece of history can be understood or translated. In a series known for explanations, Unova chooses silence, an artistic decision that left a lasting impression. Even the Elite Four in Unova embody themes rather than just types. Grimsley represents gambling with fate, Chantal embodies storytelling and history, Caitlin symbolizes calm psychic restraint, and Marshall expresses discipline through physical training. They aren't just strong trainers, they are avatars of the values Unova grapples with: unpredictability, legacy, introspection, and perseverance. When players challenge them, it subtly reinforces how Black and White treats battling as something philosophical rather than mechanical. Victory becomes less about defeating opponents and more about proving consistency in your chosen path, truth, or ideals. Another detail many players overlook is how often Black and White revisits the concept of duality without ever repeating itself. Opelucid City changes based on version, ancient and traditional in white, modern and technological in black. The same location becomes two different reflections of history, showing what a city can become depending on which ideals it follows. Even the music changes dramatically: a serene flute composition in white, and a futuristic synth arrangement in black. Few places in Pokémon shift their identity so completely while remaining canonically the same location. Opelucid doesn't just look different, it feels different, and that's where Unova's storytelling excels. Then there's the Giant Chasm, a location so quietly unsettling that players still talk about it. The eerie stillness of the forest, the frozen crater, and the residual presence of Kyurem create an atmosphere unlike anything in previous regions. Rather than filling the area with dialogue or exposition, the game lets the environment speak. The silence becomes the narrative. Pokémon like Clefairy, Piloswine, and Vanillish wander the area, hinting at drastic climate shifts that occurred long before the player arrived. When Kyurem is finally discovered, the feeling isn't excitement, it's recognition. The place already told its story through ambiance, and Kyurem is simply the final piece. One of the most fascinating touches in Unova's world building lies in the battle subway. At first glance, it seems like a simple battle facility, but the repetition of movement, the distant announcements, and the subtle hum of the subway create a rhythm that mirrors the journey of the player. Trainers come and go, traveling in loops that feel endless, each with their own ideals and truths they chase. The idea that battles are like destinations, places you arrive at repeatedly, refine, and understand slowly, reflects the theme of growth that sits at the heart of Black and White. Even something as mundane as a subway becomes symbolic when framed through the region's philosophy. Another overlooked detail sits in Accumula Town, the quiet place where the first major speech by Team Plasma takes place. Players assume the moment is only important because of the speech itself, but the location matters even more. Accumula is peaceful, calm, and unremarkable. It represents the ordinary world, the world that Team Plasma aims to disrupt with their ideas. When Getsus speaks, his words echo across a place that symbolizes innocence, making the contrast intentional. Unova uses space not just as scenery, but as emotional framing. Cultural details bring the region to life in ways fans often appreciate subconsciously. The cafe culture in Castelia City reflects the modern pace and unity of diverse lifestyles. The driftwood-themed architecture of Driftvale City represents transition and change. Black City and White Forest symbolize paths taken and paths abandoned. Everything in Unova is built around meaning. Players don't just walk through towns, they walk through metaphors. Even Victory Road in Unova is uniquely structured. Rather than being an intimidating labyrinth or a mountain ascent, it's rooted in natural geology, quiet caves, cliffsides, and flowing waterfalls. It feels more like a reflective pilgrimage than an endurance test. The calm music reflects this, offering a sense of arrival rather than danger. By the time players reach the final bridge to the Pokémon League, the atmosphere isn't triumphant or dramatic, it's serene. The game trusts you to understand the weight of the moment without telling you how to feel. The Pokémon League building itself reinforces that tone. Rather than towering above the world, it sits quietly atop a snowy plateau. The architecture is solemn, almost cathedral-like, reflecting the idea that battling here is not a spectacle but a ritual. It's a display of conviction, your truth or your ideal made manifest. And the moment you step inside, the game reminds you that strength is not measured by noise or intensity, but by the consistency of your actions across the entire journey. The lore of Black and White extends far beyond the main story. Even the post-game areas add depth. The village bridge, with its layered soundtrack, footsteps, vocals, guitar, flowing water, feels like a living community. It represents unity and harmony, the very values Unova tries to cultivate after its ideological struggles. Many players visit the village, not for battles, but simply to listen to the soundtrack build piece by piece, becoming richer the longer they stay. Few places in Pokémon reward patience in such a subtle way. One of the most symbolic details in the game lies in the Pokémon musical. While many players dismissed it as a simple minigame, its themes speak quietly to the game's core message. Pokémon and trainers perform together, not to win, but to express something. There is no competition, only participation, creativity, and emotional connection. In a game filled with ideological conflict, the musical becomes a reminder that companionship is its own reward, separate from power or correctness. Hidden lore also surrounds the Royal Unova, a luxury liner that leaves each evening. Its schedule, limited availability, and changing routes reflect the idea that opportunities in life aren't constant. Some appear only if you're willing to wait for them, mirroring the structure of daily life. The ship itself, with its dining halls, observation decks, and quiet sea routes, feels like a glimpse into a world that exists beyond the main storyline. It's a peaceful break from conflict, reinforcing the message that the world continues to move even when the player isn't looking. Perhaps the most emotional detail of all lies in N's castle. When the castle surrounds the Pokémon League, rising from the depths like a shadow surfacing, it transforms a place of tradition into a place of confrontation. Yet after the climax, when the castle is abandoned, its ruins become strangely quiet. Broken pillars, empty halls, and silent rooms hint at the fleeting nature of misguided ideals. The world moves on, but the remnants of conflict remain, waiting for those who seek to understand them. N's room, with its toys and drawings, serves as quiet commentary, a reminder that even antagonists carry wounds shaped by loneliness and manipulation. Unova remains a region unlike any other, a place where lore is hidden in small towns, backgrounds, and scenery rather than long explanations. It asks players to listen, to pay attention, and to understand that truth and ideals aren't things you discover at the end of a journey, but things you discover while walking through it. And so every forest, every city, Every quiet, abandoned ruin becomes part of that reflection. By the time the credits roll, Unova leaves players with a rare feeling, not closure, but clarity. A sense that the world is vast and complicated, yet deeply connected. A sense that the journey was not about catching legendary Pokémon or defeating opponents, but about growth, balance, and perspective. And even long after leaving the region behind, its music, environments, and characters stay with players like memories of a place they once lived rather than a game they once played.